Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are heading out into the freezing, desolate wastes of northern Canada. We're talking about what is absolutely one of the most chilling campfire mysteries of the 20th century. Picture this, right? It's November 1930. The landscape is just completely blasted by wind and ice. The cold is literally unimaginable. And you've got this lone fur trapper making his way toward an Inuit settlement he knows pretty well. He's probably looking forward to a warm fire, maybe some friendly faces. But when he gets there, nobody. The entire village has just vanished into thin air. It's a crazy story of ghost towns, bizarre anomalies, and, as you'll see, the fascinating way a single tall tale can mutate over decades. To really wrap our heads around this story, we gotta understand this setting. We are deep in the Canadian barren grounds of Nunavut. Now, to put that into perspective, this area is so incredibly remote that even today, there's roughly 50 square kilometers of barren rock and ice for every single person. In November, temperatures plunge way below freezing. It's just an unbroken plain of snow and ice scraped flat by the wind. And into this totally unforgiving environment walks our protagonist, a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle. The legend goes that LaBelle trudged through this freezing expanse right up to the shores of Lake Angikuni. He was expecting to find this bustling, friendly little village of about 30 people that he'd been trading with for years. But instead of a welcoming community, LaBelle stumbles into an absolute nightmare. And it's the details of this discovery that make the legend so incredibly creepy. The entire population was gone, right? But it wasn't like they packed up and left. No way. LaBelle reported finding unfinished caribou shirts with bone needles literally still resting in the fabric. He found meals left hanging over fires that were actually still smoldering. And then it gets darker. He found the village's sled dogs tied up and dead from starvation. He even found an ancestral grave that had been dug up and totally emptied, but the stones circling the grave completely undisturbed. It was like the earth had just swallowed these villagers whole, right in the middle of their daily chores. I mean, LaBelle was supposedly so spooked that he just turned and fled to the nearest telegraph office to alert the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1, Cracks in the Story, Questioning the Myth. Now, when you apply just a tiny bit of critical thinking here, the frozen foundation of this mystery really starts to crack. Like, wait a minute, how do starving dogs coexist with burning fires? Think about it. If a fire's still smoldering, the villagers couldn't have been gone for more than a few hours, max. Yet, the sled dogs were found dead from starvation. Now, these dogs were incredibly valuable to the Inuit. They would absolutely never be left behind. Plus, it takes days, if not weeks, for a dog to starve to death. So the timeline presented in the original story, it completely contradicts itself right out of the gate.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the physical geography of the area completely shatters the myth. You see, the legend, which got super popular thanks to an author named Frank Edwards back in 1959, claimed LaBelle found sealskin kayaks battered by wave action on the beach. But the reality? Lake Angikuni in November is entirely frozen solid. There is absolutely no wave action, period. Furthermore, Angikuni is a landlocked lake deep in the barren grounds. There are no seals there, and there's no willow wood to build the frames for those eastern Igloolik-style kayaks. Look, it's not totally impossible for Inuit to portage kayaks inland, but finding them this far inland, at a landlocked puddle of a lake, it's highly, highly suspect.
The contradictions don't stop there. They extend to Joe LaBelle himself. The whole story relies on his credibility, right? He's supposed to be this seasoned trapper who was super familiar with this specific village. But official records actually show LaBelle had just taken out his very first trapping license in that specific area. He primarily worked way far to the south, down in northern Manitoba. Furthermore, the RCMP noted that a permanent settlement of 30 people simply could not exist in that specific, completely desolate region of the Northwest Territories. Oh, and by the way, a real experienced trapper would definitely not mistake caribou hide garments, which is what they supposedly found, for sealskin.
Moving on to Part 2, the RCMP investigation. Let's talk about debunking the hoax. So if LaBelle didn't actually find this ghost town, where did the story even come from? Well, back in November 1930, a journalist named Emmett E. Kelleher published this vanishing village story in a newspaper called the Danville Bee. Naturally, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were quickly flooded with panicked inquiries. But by January 1931, Sergeant J. Nelson filed his official report. And let me tell you, he completely dismantled this hoax. Nelson stated flat out there was no foundation for this story. He went out and interviewed local traders in the area, and none of them had ever even heard of a village at Lake Angikuni.
He also noted that Kelleher had a bit of a reputation. He was notorious for making up, let's call them, colorful stories. Nelson even proved that the super eerie photograph of the empty village published with the article, yeah, that was literally just a generic, mislabeled photo pulled straight out of a 1909 RCMP archive. The police closed the book on it immediately.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is Part 3, How the Myth Grew. An evolving legend. Because the story definitely didn't end with the RCMP debunking it. Actually, that was just the beginning. The survival and mutation of this story is such a fascinating case study in the ultimate game of telephone. Let's trace it out here. We start with Kelleher's original fabricated article in 1930, which is quickly followed by the RCMP's 1931 debunking. And then, for almost 3 decades, the story just lay dormant, until 1959. That's when Frank Edwards resurrected it in his book Stranger Than Science. He presented the mystery as absolute fact, conveniently leaving out the RCMP's conclusions entirely. After that, the story bounced around paranormal circles for a bit, until 1977. That's when Betty Hill, who is pretty famous for her own claimed UFO abduction, wrote in to Fate magazine. She claimed a Mountie told her the villagers were actually taken by flying saucers. Yep. From that exact moment on, ufologists completely hijacked the narrative, and the legend just spiraled totally out of control. Okay, let's track the inflation of this myth using just one simple metric: the population of the missing village. In Emmett E. Kelleher's original 1930 article, the claim was that exactly 25 men, women, and children vanished from 6/10. Then, by the time Frank Edwards resurrected the tale in 1959 for his book, he slightly inflated that number. He started claiming it was a bustling, permanent little village of 30 inhabitants.
But then we fast forward to a 1983 book titled The World's Great UFO Mysteries. By this point, the authors really needed the story to sound like this massive, undeniable cover-up. So what did they do? They pumped the population of the vanished village all the way up to 1,200 people. I mean, wow.
And the absurdity absolutely peaks in the internet age. By 2001, online articles were seriously claiming that a staggering 2,000 people vanished from the lake. The internet lore also just started throwing in these wildly exaggerated details, like claiming the dead sled dogs were found buried under 12 feet of snow. The core lie just kept snowballing and snowballing. So the absolutely crucial point here is this: there was no vanished village. In 1988, when asked about the legend by skeptical researchers, RCMP historian S.W. Harral actually dug back into the old files. He even spoke to retired Mounties who had served during the 1930s. And his conclusion firmly shuts the case. He stated that the officers were astounded that such a ridiculous tale could be believed. The RCMP never sent out search parties. Joe LaBelle never came bursting into their office in a panic. The whole shebang was quite literally a fiction concocted by a journalist who was just looking for a sensational headline. At the end of the day, the vanishing village of Lake Angikuni isn't really a story about the paranormal. It's a story about human nature. It shows exactly how easily we prioritize a captivating, spooky narrative over boring geographical facts and logical timelines. It's a perfect example of how secondary sources can take a completely debunked lie and just breathe new life into it for decades. So it really makes you think. If a completely fabricated newspaper article from 1930 can seamlessly mutate into a 2,000-person UFO conspiracy, what modern myths, what sensational headlines scrolling across our screens today are we just accepting as fact without ever checking the source? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Stay curious out there, and always remember to check your sources.